Salve, Regina, Mater misericordiae.
Sometimes we Orthodox traditional Catholics have a funny way of distancing ourselves from this particular passage in the Gospel. And there's some necessary distinctions that we as traditional Orthodox Catholics make that need to be made in order to understand what our Lord is actually saying in the Gospel. Because a lot of times people, just in general, as Catholics in the pews, will talk about being judgmental. And personally experienced, for example, family members who are getting married outside the church and say the mom deciding, I'm not participating in this, and then everybody jumps on the mom and says, don't judge and you won't be judged. When in fact, as a mother, it's a responsibility to point out the fact that her own children are being married outside the church and in a way that's illicit and displeasing to God. So a lot of times this is thrown in our face as any time you make a moral judgment about anything and assert that morality is objective, you're judging. And because after all, God's going to respect everybody's conscience, and as long as we all think that we're doing what's right, and as we judge it, that God is fine with that. And we know that's false. That's not the teaching of the Church. That's not the teaching of Christ. That's not going to get us to heaven. At the same time, we still have, I think, sometimes a way of distancing ourselves from this passage in the Gospel, because quite frankly, we do a lot of judging and we enjoy it. And it's a vice that is common not only to those who are not practicing their faith, but very often, really, to those that are. Our Lord made it very clear that hypocrisy is in fact, a vice of religious people. And, of course, the irreligious throw that in our face as well a lot of times, that we're just a bunch of hypocrites. But the fact remains, we are largely, because we say that we're going to do a lot of things and we criticize the way other people live, but a lot of times we don't walk the walk ourselves. And it's very easy for us as religious people, as Orthodox Catholics, to become comfortable with our criticisms of other people and focus our attention on that rather than on our own conversion. And, virtue lies in the middle, of course, and charity is disposed to forgive. Charity is disposed to look beyond the faults of others and to point the finger at ourselves. It is a problem, and it's a problem that we can't overlook as religious, traditional, Orthodox Catholics. It is a vice that is typical to us. And it's one, that I'm in the peculiar position of illustrating the truth of, because here I stand criticizing it, when in fact I'm guilty of it myself. But that shouldn't stop us from standing up and trying to do better, and from reminding ourselves that it's our responsibility to pray and to do penance before anything else. Sometimes we pride ourselves as Orthodox priests, or we like to see a priest give a rousing homily and have some people get up and walk out. Maybe I'm not so good at that, but I'd sometimes like to give a nice homily on this subject to a bunch of Orthodox Catholics and have a bunch of them get up and walk out, because it is a really big problem. We sit around at the dinner table and we trash people that we think are on their way to hell, and they may very well be on their way to hell, but we do very little to change it other than simply gratify our own vices when we indulge ourselves in this fashion. And what happens is that we get in the habit of doing it, and as we try to cultivate a truly a deep life of prayer and a life of a moral life, and try to create places, little sanctuaries like here, or little homes, people who are trying to live their faith, little communities, wherever they are, as we try to create these environments that are good for people, places that you can bring your kids, where they can, come and learn something and have some fun without being constantly in the proximate occasion of sin. While we're trying to do that, we also create something that is, frankly, almost a little sectarian, because it becomes a place where people also come and they find themselves being looked up and down. Are they dressed exactly the right way? Do they fit within the group? And I know this is a fact, and it is a fact, and if we're honest about it, we all know it's a fact. And it's not right. People get looked up and down, they get sized up, they get categorized, and they get written off. We do it. And it's wrong. It's very wrong. And it is something that our Lord criticizes. And he criticizes it very much. The other thing is that sometimes people say, well, this is directed towards the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are the religious hypocrites in the gospel. And the Sadducees had lost their faith. So, they were so far out, and it was just directed towards these people that were way out there. And then the Pharisees, while they may have had their faith, they rejected Christ. They rejected the Christ. Our Lord came to them, and they threw him off. And they were in bad faith. So our Lord is only talking about people who really are out there, people who are in bad faith. He's not talking about us. But the fact also remains that the Pharisees and Sadducees prided themselves on being the religious and being righteous. They were convinced that they were doing the right thing. They even thought that they were doing the right thing when they were when they were delivering our Lord over. Whether they were in good faith and bad faith, I think many of them were in bad faith. It's clear from what our Lord says in the gospel. But the fact remains is that they judged themselves to be righteous, and they decided it was in their capacity to categorize everybody else. That's something we shouldn't be doing. I'm not saying that we go back to and remember what I said at the beginning of this homily about our duty, not just a right, but our duty to make moral judgments about choices and to do what we have to do. Like parents have to just make decisions about who their kids associate with. They have to, everyone does that. People have to make decisions about who they hire and who they don't hire, and they have to make a certain amount of a moral assessment of the people that they hire. But I've found, in some of these groups, like homeschoolers don't want to associate with non-homeschooling kids, and as a category, just becomes a category, straight across the board. You're not homeschooled, we don't associate with you. This is wrong. And as Orthodox Catholics or as friars, this is not something we should be doing at all. I see in sometimes even in our own little groups that we have here at the friary, this is a tendency, and it's not good. It's really not good at all. So let us take our Lord's words to heart and ask him to give us the strength always to be steadfast in our faith and uncompromising in our moral life, and clear in our words, courageous in our apostolate, but also, as St. Francis de Sales recommended, that we should also be meek, broad-minded, forgiving, willing to see the good in other people, disinclined. We should be disinclined to see the bad in other people. All of these things should also be a part of our spiritual life. It's not easy. It's a balance. It's easy to go to the extreme. It's easy to oversimplify things and say, oh, everybody's bad, or to say, oh, everybody's good. But that's not the way things work. The real spiritual life requires us to work hard at all the virtues, every one of the virtues, and to find the perfection of each virtue by practicing the others. It's never easy, but God's grace is always with us. Let us turn to Our Lady and to our holy guardian angels who speak to us through the voice of conscience to help us do these things for the glory of God and the conversion and sanctification of souls.